How pressure moves without force. Power is often imagined as something applied directly, an order given, a law passed, a threat issued. But inside the White House, some of the strongest pressure is never applied at all. It simply moves, 97 quietly, invisibly, without force. This matters because modern leadership rarely operates through overt commands alone. In high-stakes environments, pressure travels through expectation, proximity, and timing. It shapes behavior not by demanding compliance, but by making certain choices feel unavoidable. The process begins subtly. A raised eyebrow during a briefing, a question asked repeatedly about one option and never about another, a meeting that keeps being postponed. None of these actions compel obedience. Yet together, they send a clear signal about what is wanted 97 and what is not. Inside the White House, people are trained to detect these signals. Careers depend on reading the room correctly. When pressure moves this way, no one needs to be told what to do. They anticipate it. They align themselves with momentum before resistance ever forms. At first, this feels efficient. There are fewer confrontations, less open disagreement. Decisions seem to emerge organically, as if everyone independently reached the same conclusion. But that appearance is misleading. What's really happening is convergence under pressure that was never formally applied. The president may never intend to exert influence this way. In fact, it often happens precisely because leadership avoids explicit direction. By leaving space unfilled, pressure rushes in to occupy it. The system self-organizes around perceived preference. This is how force becomes unnecessary. When people internalize expectation, compliance becomes voluntary. Dissent fades not because it is forbidden, but because it feels futile. Pressure has already done its work. The danger lies in its invisibility. When pressure moves without force, accountability becomes diffuse. No one can point to coercion. No one can name the moment influence was applied. And yet, outcomes follow a predictable path. Understanding this dynamic is essential to understanding how real power functions inside the Oval Office, because not all pressure pushes. Some of it pulls. And once it does, resisting becomes harder than obeying ever was. Once pressure begins moving this way, the system adapts around it. Individuals adjust behavior without needing instruction. Teams preemptively align proposals. Language shifts to mirror what is believed to be preferred. The pressure never needs to intensify because it has already been absorbed. Inside the White House, this creates a powerful feedback loop. The absence of resistance is interpreted as agreement. Agreement reinforces confidence. Confidence solidifies expectation. Soon, pressure no longer needs a move at all. It has settled into the structure of decision-making. What makes this especially effective is deniability. No one is forced. No rule is broken. Every action can be justified as independent judgment. And yet, outcomes converge with remarkable consistency. Pressure has guided behavior without ever revealing itself. Advisors begin to notice the change when certain ideas stop appearing, not because they are rejected, but because they are never raised. The system learns what survives and what doesn't. Over time, self-censorship replaces debate, not out of fear but efficiency. The president experiences this as alignment, fewer disagreements, faster execution, a sense that the team is unified. But alignment achieved through invisible pressure is fragile. It lacks the testing that exposes flaws early. It rewards speed over resilience. The danger emerges when reality pushes back. A policy underperforms. An assumption fails. And suddenly, there is no clear explanation for how everyone arrived at the same wrong conclusion. Pressure moved without force, but accountability now demands answers. At this point, leadership faces an uncomfortable truth. Pressure that is never acknowledged cannot be corrected. If no one admits it exists, no one can recalibrate it. The system continues converging even when it should diverge. This is the moment where invisible pressure reveals its cost, not in how it operates 97, but in how difficult it is to stop once it has shaped behavior. The White House now stood at that moment. Pressure had moved without force. Results had followed. And the system had to decide whether to continue mistaking convergence for consensus. Because when pressure is invisible, it doesn't feel like control. It feels like inevitability. The conflicts surface when outcomes no longer match intent. A decision delivered results that surprised even its strongest advocates. A policy advanced smoothly, yet produced resistance no one had anticipated. And when leadership asked how this had happened, the answer was unsettling. No one had forced the path forward. Everyone had simply moved in the same direction. Advisors began tracing the process backward. They found no directive to question, no command to challenge, just a series of small signals that had nudged behavior over time. Pressure had guided action without ever appearing as pressure. And because it was never acknowledged, it was never tested. The president recognized the danger immediately. When pressure operates invisibly, it bypasses the safeguards designed to prevent collective error. Debate fades. Dissent disappears. What remains looks like unity, but functions like vulnerability. The system becomes confident precisely when it should be cautious. The conflict deepened as advisors confronted their own roles. Each had adjusted slightly. Each had anticipated expectation. No one had acted irrationally. And yet together, they had created an outcome no one fully owned. Responsibility had diffused along the same invisible pathways pressure had traveled. This was the emotional peak. Not anger, not blame, but recognition. Recognition that leadership had been shaping behavior without realizing it. That restraint had turned into signal. That silence had become guidance. And that pressure had moved faster than awareness. The president faced a choice. Allow this dynamic to continue, accepting efficiency at the cost of resilience, or disrupt it, knowing that reintroducing friction would slow decisions and surface conflict. The latter would feel like regression. The former risked repetition. Silence filled the room. 97 not uncertainty, but clarity. Invisible pressure had reached its limit. It had delivered results, but at the cost of transparency and correction. Continuing this way would mean surrendering the ability to learn from mistakes before they hardened into crisis. Leadership now demanded something counterintuitive. Not more control, but more visibility. Not smoother alignment, but deliberate resistance. The conflict had resolved itself into a single truth. Pressure that moves without force must eventually be named, or it will continue shaping outcomes without consent. And in that moment, the White House prepared to change how power moved inside its walls. The resolution did not come through force or reversal. It came through exposure. The president chose to make pressure visible, 97 naming preferences explicitly, inviting disagreement openly, and rewarding dissent instead of silence. Inside the White House, the change was immediate and uncomfortable. Meetings grew louder. Timelines slowed. Competing views resurfaced. What once felt like seamless alignment now felt like friction. But that friction was not dysfunction. It was correction. By stating expectations clearly, leadership removed the need for anticipation. Advisors no longer guessed intent. They responded to it. Pressure stopped moving invisibly and began operating within defined boundaries. Influence remained 97, but it could now be questioned. This shift restored accountability. When outcomes followed, responsibility could be traced. When mistakes occurred, they could be examined honestly. The system regained its ability to self-correct before reality imposed harsher lessons. The president understood the trade-off. Efficiency had been sacrificed, speed reduced, but resilience returned. Decisions became slower but stronger, less elegant but more durable. Pressure no longer shaped outcomes quietly. 97. It was engaged directly. Over time, the benefits became clear. Policies reflected a wider range of risk. Blind spots narrowed. Confidence returned, not because disagreement vanished, but because it was visible and managed. Power moved openly again. Pressure will always exist in places of authority. It cannot be eliminated, but it can be acknowledged, shaped, and bounded. When it is allowed to operate unseen, it becomes control. When it is brought into the open, it becomes leadership. How pressure moves without force reveals how power truly works, and how it is corrected reveals how leadership endures. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. How